Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I have a reading podcast for you today. I think my voice sounds pretty normal right now, but I am getting over a cold. It was the weirdest thing. I felt fine most of the day, like the first day that I noticed symptoms. It was like at maybe 2:30, I was teaching my last class of the day and suddenly my throat hurt so much. I couldn't swallow. Felt like everything was getting really stuffy really fast. I had a couple of students tell me that they had siblings who were home with really bad colds or flu symptoms. So I got kind of worried. I felt miserable all that evening and then took a sick day the following day. Felt a little bit off for the morning, but felt like normal-ish by the time school would have been over in the afternoon. And now I feel mostly normal. Today's a Saturday when I'm filming this. I'm feeling mostly fine. But I do feel like a little bit of raspiness in my throat and like some slight congestion, but I don't feel as exhausted as I did the last day or two. So I'm hoping that maybe actually taking the sick day for once helped. I'm someone who's very hesitant to take sick days because finding a sub is really tough sometimes, especially if you're a specialist teacher and I'm the librarian. So I'm hoping that actually taking the sick day helped me get over it faster, but otherwise it's some sort of like weird turbo cold that just went through my system really quickly and now seems to be pretty much done. So yeah, it was just kind of a weird thing going on, but if my voice sounds different or funky in this video, that's what's going on. I did want to dive into the books that I read this past month, so books I read in January of 2026, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about how I combine some of my hobbies to get some reading in, and if you know from the rest of my channel, needle crafts, specifically knit and crochet, are my two biggest hobbies other than reading. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I kind of combine those things so that I get some crafting done, but also get my reading done. And there's kind of two main methods that I use to do this. The first, which is probably the more obvious one, is using audiobooks while knitting or crocheting. And this one is definitely easier if I am doing a project where I do have to look at it more frequently or look at my stitches. Having the book as an audio form is way easier. So just to kind of talk about how I differentiate projects for that. I can knit stockinette in the round or garter stitch pretty much without looking at it, but almost everything else I do need to glance down every so often while I'm working, which makes an audiobook much easier. And definitely crochet projects I can't do without looking. So when I'm reading audiobooks, if I don't have the opportunity to play it out loud on a nice set of speakers, I like wireless wireless earpods. I don't know what combination of words I messed up there. These are the ones that I use. They are the Tozo brand. I got these from Amazon, I believe on a Black Friday deal at some point, because I know that I had a significant percentage off when I got these, which is why I got them in the first place. And I really love these. The charge holds for a really long time. The earbuds are pretty comfortable to wear. However, I am actually looking at a second pair of wireless earbuds because I want to get the kind that doesn't actually sit in your ear. It uses the conduction method for sound. Because I do also listen to audiobooks a lot while I'm shelving books at the library. And I feel like having a set of earphones that doesn't actually plug my ears would be a good idea, just so that I can be aware of my surroundings. I also thought that those would be nice if I'm listening to something while going for a walk so that I can still hear traffic sounds or people walking by or things like that. But these are the ones I currently have. Love them. I keep them in my purse. They go with me everywhere I go. There's also an app that works with these that has the option for different sound levels. So there's a level called aware mode, I believe is what it is, so that it doesn't completely block out sound. But at the end of the day, even with that setting on, there is still something physically in your ear blocking sound. So I am interested to try some of those conduction ones. I think it's called bone conduction. But basically the part that like plays the sound sits right here on your ear, and there's like an arm that holds it to your ear instead of just sitting inside. So I'm curious to try those out. I think that might be a purchase coming soon. But anyway, I do really enjoy listening to audiobooks while I knit or crochet. And I get my audiobooks from two different places. The first one and most frequent one is Libby, which is an online or an app way to get electronic copies of library books, whether they are ebooks or audiobooks. And I really like kind of just browsing through what's immediately available, picking an audiobook and diving right in. I don't think about it too much. And I actually have one of those in my book list to talk about today. And then my other source is Audible. I do use Audible for audiobooks that I feel like I will listen to again, or ones that my library doesn't have. So the 1 credit a month does work pretty well for me. I don't find myself looking for too many credits beyond that. The other time that I will do an audiobook from Audible is if I need it immediately for some reason, whether it was from the days that I was in book club and I needed a copy right away, or like I've done it a couple times if I'm going on a field trip with students where I haven't read the book that the field trip is somehow centered around. So I have used it for that as well, but definitely the headphones are the important part of that equation. The other way that I do my knitting and reading is if I'm knitting a stockinette in the round project or a garter stitch project, which basically means that I'm only doing knit stitches. I can do that pretty mindlessly and without looking at it. So I have this pillow. This is a reading pillow, and I know it looks kind of funky right now, but it's because it folds flat. There's a little button tab that you can undo and then tent the pillow and Velcro it in place, and it holds your book or your tablet right here so that you can read. If I'm knitting and reading, I most often am reading on my tablet. I have a really ancient Samsung tablet. I don't have a specific e-reader because I want to be able to access Amazon Kindle books and Nook books and Libby books, and the Amazon Kindle won't let you access Nook books. The Barnes & Noble Nook won't let you access Amazon books, and I believe has some issues with Libby. So I just use a regular old tablet so that I can get everything. And primarily if I'm knitting and reading, I am doing it on a tablet, and I'm using this pillow so that the book can the tablet can sit in front of me, and every few stitches I can swipe the page to turn the page. This also works pretty well for hardcover books, as long as they are what I refer to as floppy books, whether it's a hardcover or a paperback. What I mean by that is one that will kind of sit open by itself. This is probably not even a very good example, but used books that are a bigger size tend to work better. The like tiny paperbacks don't work for this at all. But if it's a big enough book, and if I'm at a point in it where it kind of can stay open by itself, I can also use the pillow this way and physically turn the pages as I'm knitting, as long as it's something that will stay open by itself. Doing kind of large books works really well for this. I know at one point I was rereading the Narnia series several years ago, and I have a big illustrated copy of the Chronicles of Narnia where it's all 7 books in one volume, and it's like the size of a textbook. That one stays open by itself really well. But those are my kind of tips and tricks for how to craft and read at the same time. There are lots of versions of pillows like this on Amazon. I picked this one because I liked that it had the pen slots. I liked that you could kind of adjust where the tablet sits with those little ridges, and I liked that it folds flat. Here comes a Velcro sound. Sorry about that. That makes it really easy to take while traveling, and also even to use in the car. So really, really nice. And it does fit pretty well in a backpack, especially if the backpack has like a laptop pocket and you're not bringing a laptop. This can sometimes fit in there. All right, on to the books that I actually read last month. So the first one was an audiobook, so I don't have the physical copy. This was The Block Party by Jamie Day. And this was one that I got because it was immediately available on Libby the day that I was looking for an audiobook. This was a thriller, mystery, kind of high-stakes suburban drama. It reminded me a lot of Big Little Lies, but it centered around a couple of families that all live on the same street and a murder that takes place. There were a couple things about this book that I really liked and a couple things that I didn't. One is, and this might have been because I was listening to the audio version, it jumps back and forth in time quite a lot. So we kind of have a big open with the day of the murder happens during a summer block party. And we don't know who's been murdered. We've only been introduced to a few characters. And then it jumps back in time. So it kind of opens with the murder and then goes back to the, like, all the events that led up to someone being murdered. But the whole time you're doing the kind of backlog of information, you still don't know who died. Which is kind of a cool twist. But the combination of the jumping back and forth in time, because it did go forwards and backwards a couple times, it also has multiple POVs. So the combination of those two things made it a little hard to follow it sometimes. I was glad that the narrator, actually I believe there were multiple narrators. They used different voices for the different POVs, which was helpful. It also goes back and forth between kind of an adult group of characters and a teenage group of characters. And they did do a good job, like, differentiating between the two. It was just a little hard to follow the timeline of things. This book also had a lot of plot points going on, both just between the two groups of characters and how all those plot points intertwined. And it felt like every plot point was a big, giant reveal. And it felt like there was too much going on, at least in my opinion. But if you needed a really exciting, kind of dark, dramatic book to read, this would be a good fit. I rated it 3.5 stars just because it wasn't my favorite, but it was entertaining. I'll give it that. The next book I read was one that I picked up in my free little library that we now have at work, and this was The Borrowed Life of Frederick Fife, or Frederick Fife. I'm not sure how the author intended the name to be pronounced. But this one was very different from the previous read. This was more of an emotional, kind of narrative fiction story, and it follows Frederick Fife. That's how I was reading the name throughout the story, so I'll just keep saying Friedrich. Friedrich is an older gentleman who is at a point in his life where he is about to lose his home because he's behind on rent payments and is really struggling with what to do next. He goes for a walk, and during the walk he discovers a deceased man who is sitting in a wheelchair near the river. And in trying to help him, Friedrich accidentally knocks him over. The dead man goes down the river, and Friedrich looks so much like this man that the man's nursing home caretakers assume that Friedrich is this other guy and kind of take him into the nursing home. The man who died also has issues with memory loss, so when Friedrich starts saying his real name and trying to clarify things, he's kind of brushed off. So Friedrich is then kind of left in this conundrum. He does go by Fred during most of the book. Fred has this kind of conundrum of, he knows that he doesn't actually have a home to go back to, but he also knows he's taking the place of somebody else. And it goes as far as when the other man's body is discovered, it's assumed to be him. And Fred doesn't have any relatives or family members left, so he kind of just slides into this living at the nursing home, but starts picking up details about the life of the man that he's unintentionally impersonating. It was a really good novel. I think it did a good job showing the relationship between a caretaker and a patient at a nursing home, because there's several instances of that. It did a really good job of showing a lot of empathy towards characters who have been through some very traumatic life experiences. I would recommend this book for people who need something emotional to read, because it's definitely in that category. You're not going to get through this without feeling a little sad. But I will say it does have a happy ending, so you can go into it knowing that there will be a resolution at the end. Obviously, there's a death that occurs, so that it's not a complete everybody lives happily ever after kind of ending, but it does have a very positive ending that shows a lot of mended relationships between characters. And it's also about Fred kind of finding a newfound family through this experience. So very, very good book. I gave it 4 stars just because there were a couple points in the book that were a little bit slow or a little bit repetitive, but that might have been too harsh of a review. I did really, really enjoy it. The next book I read, I don't physically have with me, although I did read it as a physical book. It is called The Extremely Inconvenient Adventures of Bronte Meadowstone by Jacqueline Moriarty. This is the first book in the Kingdoms and Empires series. And this is a children's book. It's a middle grade fantasy novel. And I got these books in kind of a roundabout way. So I actually found the 3rd book in the series first, but because they don't have any numbering on the spine or the cover, I didn't know it was the 3rd book in a series, so then I had to track down the first 2. So I purchased the first 2 books as used copies, I believe through Amazon, but I think it was fulfilled by Half Price Books. So this was the first book in the series, and it follows the main character, Bronte, who is 10 years old, and she suddenly finds out that her parents were killed by pirates, but she's never lived with her parents. She lives with her aunt, so this doesn't really affect her emotionally until she gets a letter from them with a series of tasks that she has to complete. And she has to complete them because this list is enchanted by fairies using fairy cross stitch. So if she breaks the rules of the list, then terrible things will happen. So it's definitely the quintessential childlike fantasy of a child going off on a quest that they have no business going on, with the exception that in this one, all of the adults also think that this is ridiculous for this child to have to go on this months-long quest to visit all of these people and do all of these things. But because of that, they do help her along the way. This was a very imaginative story. I gave it 4 stars because it was also one that was a little hard to follow. There was a lot going on in the book, but because it was kind of episodic in its structure, because she goes from family member to family member, if you missed a couple things in the previous chapter, it didn't really affect the next chapter all that much. So it did work well despite that. And there's just a lot of creativity in the world building here. I did really enjoy reading it, even though I was feeling a little bit lost by the end. That could also be because I was reading it at school, which meant that there were lots of interruptions. I generally, if my students have silent reading time in the library, I try to also read a book while they are silent reading, because that just seems like best practice as a librarian. And I generally try to pick books that I have either read before or interruptions won't really affect the reading experience, because I work with small children. There are a lot of interruptions. Although the ones who do silent reading are really more 2nd grade and up, so 2nd through 5th. But still, a lot of asking to go to the bathroom or asking for a bookmark or finding a book for somebody. So this was probably not the best book to choose for that experience, but since I knew that I was getting it for the school library, I thought it would be fun for the kids to see me reading it and then see it appear on the shelf. So that's all I'll say about that one. And then the next book I read is the second book in the series. This is Kingdoms and Empires, book number 2. It is called The Slightly Alarming Tale of the Whispering Wars. This is what it looks like, if it'll focus. I also gave this one 4 stars, kind of for the same reasons as the first one, of just that there's a lot going on. It is slightly hard to follow. There's a lot of characters. This one takes place before the Adventures of Bronte Meadowstone, but Bronte does appear in this book as a time traveler. So I think these books are designed that you could read them in any order, but there are definitely callbacks to the previous book in this one. I'm just going to refer to this book as The Whispering Wars instead of saying the whole title again. But in The Whispering Wars, it follows a group of school children who attend a couple different schools. It starts with a between schools tournament where there's a lot of misunderstanding, and all these schools end up in arguments with each other. But while this is happening, the Whispering War breaks out, which just puts everything into chaos. So this was a lot of, again, kids going on adventures that they have no reason going on. But it was more of an ensemble cast feel versus a like single adventurer narrative. So it was definitely very different from the first book. Great series so far for adventurous readers who want a really fast-paced, high-activity book to read. So yeah, I'm currently reading the third one. Same vibe so far, really well done. Just a lot going on. The next book I read, I do have the physical copy of. This is I Am Margaret by Karina Turner. And I read a different book by Karina Turner that I'm actually doing as a read aloud at the library where I work. It's about St. Carlo Acutis. This one, I was telling people about it as it is 100% Catholic Hunger Games. Not that I have anything against the Hunger Games series. I did really enjoy those books. I do think that they probably should be targeted a little bit older than the target age that they currently have. This one I would say is even more intense than the Hunger Games as far as how dark some of the material is. But it does have similar themes to the Hunger Games as far as, you know, how do we view respect for human life? How do we view a dystopian society? But this one has very strong Catholic, not even undertones, strong Catholic plot lines in it, because part of the plot is that the main character, Margot, is Catholic, and that is not legal in the society that she lives in. So she is having to navigate this dystopian society where if you don't... I'll back up. The premise of the book is that all 18-year-olds go through a sorting process. And the sorting process basically determines whether or not you are fit as a human being to live into your adulthood. If you don't pass the sorting, you go to a private facility, kind of the equivalent of like a bunker almost. And eventually you are recycled, which means that your organs, like skin, tissue, all that stuff is used for organ donations or tissue donations, things like that. Which did really remind me a lot of Unwind by Neil Shusterman. So another similarity to a different dystopian novel there. But it also has religious persecution as a heavy part of the book. And this is another one with a lot going on, but it was very engaging. I would recommend this to people over the age of 18. Again, the premise of the book is that the sorting happens at age 18, so that kind of goes with that anyway. But it is, at times, I would say significantly darker than the Hunger Games books. But very well written. It is also a series. I don't know if I'm going to get the rest of the series at this point. It's a very long series. There's at least six or seven books. but it was very good. I will not be getting this from my school library because of the content in it, but if you have an older high school age or college age person in your life who likes to read and enjoys dystopian books, I would recommend this for a person like that. That's actually it for the month of January. How many books did I read? Looks like I only read 6 in January. So a little bit of a lower read month, but that's okay. And we're going to call that it for this episode. So I hope that this inspired you to read a little bit, or even kind of combine your reading hobby with one of your other hobbies and figure out some ways to do that. And if you liked what you saw today, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I talk about books. I talk about crafting, more crafting than books usually. But we have a lot of fun on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to follow me on another social media site, that information is in the description box below. See you in the next one. Bye, everyone.